Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 270 after 2 weeks of waiting. And quite frankly, I haven't made a video on my channel for a while, so I don't even know how long it's been since I made a review, but here I am back at it once again. So let's just kind of go right into this, because this chapter was really amazing in my opinion. Not quite the favorite chapter of the arc, but it's very close. It's like one of the best chapters we've had so far in this arc in my opinion, mostly because of the stuff that went down with Shigaraki, but we also had some really interesting information regarding Ujiko when he was talking to President Mike, which I found to be really fascinating, dating back 120 years or so. Well, not quite, but almost. So let's just start with the whole Ujiko thing, because I feel like that's just a nice way to kind of get things rolling. Yeah, so apparently, as we kind of suspected, Ujiko's been alive for a very long time. He's been alive for so long, in fact, that he'd be 120 years today, and that is something that I found to be rather interesting. And on record, he actually died a few years after some big defeat that he suffered back in the day, but it turns out he just went into hiding. He was discovered by All For One, and we see how he's just kind of explaining this whole shebang to President Mike, of course. And I think this was a really interesting way of looking at it, because first you see how he's explaining this tale, and we see how President Mike is just kind of following up on that, even though he's saying that he doesn't really want to touch Ujiko anymore. Based on what he's hearing, he's starting to feel some level of disgust while hearing this tale from Ujiko, while he's also kinda following up, as I said, on what he's saying. He's explaining that it's a tale that's kind of like this whole quirk singularity deal is something that's mostly discussed within tiny cults. Like, it's not something that's a huge thing. Like, most people don't believe in it. They think it's bogus, basically. And that is something that I find really interesting, especially as a reader, because we know that for a fact quirk singularity is very real. We have seen it in action with Deku. We've pretty much seen it with some other characters as well, but Deku's like the big thing, because we're seeing how One For All is really acting very different with Deku as opposed to how it's been described by other users of One For All, and which is why I think as a reader it's a really interesting quirk to use as an example. And it's something that made this chapter really interesting, even though the Ujiko part of this chapter isn't even like the big thing that happened this chapter. It's still a really good info drop that we got to learn, and we have some facts to use now. We know that, well, Ujiko, as we knew, is very old, but what we didn't really know for certain was whether he was the one that came up with the whole theory of quirk singularity, and it turns out that he was, and that is something that I found to be absolutely great. Like, how it all just kind of came back to him. Another thing that I find to be really interesting regarding Ujiko, but it also kind of revolves heavily around Shigaraki, is the fact that we found out that All For One, during his fight with All Might, actually used a copy of All For One. He wasn't even using the original, meaning that didn't have the original quirk set that All For One actually has. But that is something that we're going to be seeing very soon with Shigaraki, because Shigaraki has now equipped the original All For One, which we're probably going to be seeing more of next chapter, especially given what Deku said at the end of the chapter when he said that it's starting or he's coming. So it's going to be really interesting to see just how that's going to pan out different from the All For One that we're used to seeing when he was fighting All Might, which had a different set of quirks, of course, because it, obviously when you create a copy you have to start from scratch pretty much, I reckon. So we don't know what quirks are going to be part of Shigaraki's package. It's probably going to be a lot more quirks, because we're dealing with a century of All For One versus who knows how many years that a copy had stored up. Definitely not a century though, so I think All For One in the hands of Shigaraki is gonna be leagues more destructive. It's gonna be something that we've never seen before, and it's really gonna put him on a higher pedestal than he already was. And in my opinion, Shigaraki with just his own quirk to me was really destructive, and it just made him a really terrifying villain in this series. So with this All For One upgrade, we're really going to be seeing some different things happening. We're going to be seeing him being able to be kind of careless, actually, because he has so much power at his disposal. In fact, we might even see him give away some quirks, which is going to be really interesting, because, I mean, he's their leader now. And I think even though we've seen time and time again how Shigaraki isn't the most sharing person, I think there's a lot of room for change, especially now that he has so much more at his disposal compared to what he used to have when he was just his own guy with his own quirk. Alright, let's talk about the little short part we had with Exless, because I think the whole part with Exless was really interesting, because not just in the sense that, you know, we know that he's going to be facing a waking Shigaraki, but also he had this panel where he was looking at his machine and he's pointing out that this machine is still going. It was protected by all of the tubes and stuff. We don't really know what the machine is doing though, which is really interesting. So I wonder exactly what's gonna happen, if that machine is actually gonna play to some significance when it comes to Shigaraki. But I'm also really curious to see exactly what is gonna happen to Exless when Shigaraki wakes up, of course, because we already know that Shigaraki isn't just gonna let him walk out there. He is waking up this chapter. At the end of the chapter, we see his body like react very aggressively. Definitely sort of a waking sign, if you ask me. Like it feels like it's the point at which All For One is really just triggering in his body. And we just see that happening right before our eyes. Exless has no idea what's happening. He doesn't know that the original is within Shigaraki. Only present Mike really knows that, and I feel like he is going to try and warn him to stay away from Shigaraki, but I think it's gonna be too late. I think Exless is going to die. Okay, let's talk about the big thing that happened in this chapter, guys. Let's talk about the whole imagery of Shigaraki and his past just blinking before his eyes in a really interesting and beautiful way, in my opinion. This is one of the most beautiful things I've seen in My Hero Academia for a very fucked up reason, but even so, it was really a very good way to really show us what Horikoshi wanted to tell us when it came to Shigaraki's character and the path to him getting All For One. We really see another sort of way of him just breaking free from his family, like the memories he had of his family and all of that. Like way back during My Villain Academia, we obviously had his fight with Redestro. We had a flashback and we see the growth from him being a really nice boy to becoming who he actually is, and how he had suppressed all of those memories. You know, he'd been keeping all that locked away and then it all came back. He just kind of gave in and just sort of liberated himself in a way we hadn't seen before in My Hero Academia, and we kind of see something similar this time around where he is accepting All For One. He's trying to walk from his family to All For One. Like he can't have both. It's either All For One or being held back by his past, and I think the way they really did that was amazing. Like how we see his conversation with his sister was probably one of my favorites. He's really a nice guy to Hana, which is really interesting. Despite all of that which happened to Shigaraki, he still treated Hana respectfully in that sort of dream state. Like he's not actually just brushing her off and just destroying her flat out. He's actually responding very casually and very nicely, like he would have when he was younger. It's only when his father kind of comes into the picture where things really go crazy and he really just destroys everything, and we see his path to All For One and everyone is trying to keep him back and he is just destroying them, telling them flat out, you know, don't make me reject who I am. He really needed to get rid of that history within his mind, of course, in order to really become who he wants to be. Like his past was all about being a hero, that's all behind him, and now he's all about being the next All For One. He's the next symbol of chaos or the symbol of evil, whatever we want to call it. He's the one who's gonna bring down the hero society. At least that's what his goal is, much like Deku's goal being he wants to become the next symbol of peace. He wants to be the one greatest hero, the one who saves them all. It's a great parallel as well, how we're seeing the growth of Shigaraki alongside Deku's growth, but it's something that you don't see a lot in manga and anime, at least nowadays. Like it's not usually this parallel base like you've had with Shigaraki and Deku, but that's something that I really enjoy about My Hero Academia, how we have this parallel which we don't have in a lot of other series, especially new gen, of course. I mean, I'm sure there are some that do it as well. Obviously I don't read everything, so I mean, I can't really say which has it and which doesn't to 100%, but out of the things that I've been reading and watching as of recent, like there's nothing that really comes close to this parallel that you have between Deku and Shigaraki. Anyway, gonna end the video here, so let me know what you think down below in the comments about this chapter 270. What did you think of the whole Shigaraki chaotic part where we see him go through his past, leading up to him accepting All for One and him becoming the next All for One, as it were. Or if you have a comment about something else that happened in this chapter, I would love to know what you guys think. Anyway, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember, Miriko is waifu, Toga is laifu.